I need a haircut. Hello, welcome back to Lockdown in Lockdown, part 50 something. I should know because I only started again yesterday. I think it was part 55, which would make this part 56. I might have got that completely wrong. Definitely need a haircut. I look like Medusa. I feel like there are these little snakes on the top of my head going. Where were we? Execution. Alex is pretty much a monster. He is. He was on top of the tower, Alfred Furness's tower in the city. He got basically reeled into a helicopter like a fish and shot with darts to make him unconscious. And then he fell unconscious, and then he had a dream about being in an orchard and seeing a boy who he knows to be a young Alfred Furness basically nailed to a tree and cut open by his own mother. I don't know how I got away with writing that in a book for teenagers, but I'm glad I did. I really don't know how my amazing editor in America, Wes, I don't know how he didn't kind of say, this is kind of a bit gruesome, but he is an awesome guy, and so he hi Wes if you are watching these, and he kind of let me get away with it. But anyway, so Alfred Furness, young Alfred Furness, was nailed to a tree and sliced open by his own mother because she and the rest of the village thought that he was responsible for the murder of his own younger brother. And we shall carry on and crack on with Escape from Furness 5 Execution. Sorry about my squeaky chair, by the way. I don't have a gas problem. Well, I probably do, but that's just my chair. Okay. The hospital. For a second, a single, terrifying second, I thought I'd woken up in Furness Penitentiary. I was lying in a cell, walls of white painted concrete and a door of solid iron barricaded shut. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, filling the room with blinding light. My body had been wrapped in black wire from neck to toe, so much of it that I felt as though I'd been cocooned. I tried moving, but just like in my dream, I was powerless, my binds fixed to a bed or a table beneath me. Cables slid out from various parts of my body, connected to half a dozen machines along the left-hand wall of the cell, all beeping gently as if discussing the news of my waking. It took me a moment to work out that I wasn't in the prison infirmary, a moment that seemed endless. I looked up and back, seeing a window in the wall behind my head. It was barred, but the dust-specked glow that streamed through came from the sun dangling right outside. Its golden touch filled me with relief, my heart calming and my muscles relaxing. I was above ground. I wasn't in Furness. I was safe. There were these strange noises all around me, strange cries as if from alien creatures. Screams. I just made that bit up. There was a... I don't know if you can hear that, but there is a lot of screaming going on down below. I'm sorry about that. I'm sure it'll calm down in a minute. Anyway, there was a camera mounted in the corner of the room, and it must have been switched on because a series of thunderclaps echoed out from the door, bolts being slid back and locks being opened. It swung inwards, and I expected to see black suits enter, or soldiers armed to the teeth and ready to attack. Instead, the person who stepped cautiously into the room was a woman in her 40s, dressed like a doctor, a delicate silver chain swinging from her neck. Her greying blonde hair was cropped short, and her crinkled blue gaze was the kind that instantly makes you feel welcome. She was carrying a canvas chair, unfolding it beside my bed, then perching on the edge, never taking her eyes off me. She opened her mouth to speak, then hesitated, her arms reaching up to the necklace. She unclasped it, leaning forward, and I saw the small pendant attached to it, a man carrying another man over a river. I should know what this is, I thought to myself, but the memories just wouldn't come. The woman deftly clipped the chain around my neck, slipping it under the wire so that the cool silver lay against my chest. We found this in your pocket, she said, and I noticed that her accent was the same as somebody else's I once knew, a boy called Z. I tried to pull an arm free, but the wire gripped me like a million fingers, refusing to grant me an inch. The frustration boiled up my throat, and I heard myself growling, a throbbing snarl that filled the room like liquid. The woman didn't flinch. "It's okay," she went on, resting her hand on my shoulder. "Please, just relax. There's nothing to be afraid of. I wanted to give it back to you myself, a sign of good faith. I wanted you to know that you're safe here." I was too confused and too angry to take in what she was saying. What right did she have to keep me here? Didn't she know who I was, what I was capable of? The nectar was a growing storm inside me. I could feel it in my veins, giving me more power than this woman could ever comprehend. And yet, when I tried to move, I couldn't. I thrashed my head back and forth, dirty spittle streaming from between my lips. The woman shook her head, frowning, as if my pain was her pain. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me like that, with kindness, that it confounded me. "Your name is Sawyer, isn't it?" the woman asked. Sawyer. It didn't sound right. I delved into the chaos inside my head, pulling something loose from the nectar. "Alex," I whispered, coughing. The word felt alien, sitting uncomfortably on my tongue. The woman took something from her pocket, a small canteen. She unscrewed the cap and held it to my lips, letting it trickle into my mouth. I swallowed, the sensation blissful. "My name is Colonel Alice Panettiere," she said, as she replaced the cap on the canteen and sat down. "I'm in the army, as you can probably guess, but I'm also a doctor. I'm here to help you." Her voice was warm, soothing, almost hypnotic. "You're lucky to be alive, Alex. The Air Force had orders to destroy that tower and everything in it. Everything. It was only when we saw you screaming at us, screaming words at us from the spire, that we issued a capture order. We were lucky to get you before the building collapsed." I tugged at my binds again, tired of hearing her speak. I had a job to do. I had to find Furness and kill him. And she was just another obstacle in my way. Another expendable obstacle. She rested a hand on my arm, wrapped tight, and shook her head. "Don't struggle," she said. "This is shipping wire. It's the stuff that holds up transporter crates when they're being hauled off the boats. It can withstand tension of over 100 tons. And we've wrapped you pretty tight. But it's there for your own safety. Those poor limbs of yours, they're pretty dangerous weapons. We tied you up so you wouldn't accidentally hurt yourself." I tried again to move, and she looked at me like a mother looks at a naughty child. Although if you keep struggling like that, then I can't guarantee it. She stood, walking around the bed to one of those machines and staring at the readout. "Your health is good," she reported, which is incredible, really, when you think about it. You had a massive hole in your chest, another through your stomach, and an X-ray showed no fewer than 14 bullets in your body. Every single one of your major organs has taken a pummeling, and yet they're all still functioning. In fact, they're operating at a higher level than anything we've ever seen. She turned back to me, sitting on the edge of my bed with her hands in her lap. "I guess what we'd like you to do for us is explain how that's possible." It took me a while to dredge up the right words, the simple sentence seemingly the most difficult thing I'd ever had to string together. "I'm just lucky, I guess." Panettiere smiled with her eyes, but I could sense something else there, a flicker of impatience, maybe. "It's good to know you've still got your sense of humour," she said after a moment. "God knows we all need one, especially at the moment." She leaned forward, putting her hand against my brow. Her skin was cool, her touch calming. "We've spoken to your friends. They've told us quite a bit already." "Friends?" I asked, searching for memories, but they were lost beneath the nectar like photographs submerged in tar. "Z Hatcher," she explained, "and the girl, Lucy Wells. They were the ones who found us, who told us about the tower. We picked up another one too, Simon Rojo Flores. They all told us the same story, and I'm wondering whether you will too." "Furness," I said, spitting the word out like a mouthful of rancid meat. "This is all his doing." "Alfred Furness," the woman replied. "The man the prison was named after, right?" I nodded again, watching her cross the room. She checked a machine as she spoke. "Well, this is what we're finding hard to take in, because there is no Alfred Furness, not in any of our records. Sure, there's the Furness Foundation, the people who set up the penitentiary, who owned the tower, owned the buildings all over the place, actually. But the man? He can't be alive, Alex. As far as we can tell, Alfred Furness was born centuries ago. He's still alive, I said. I've spoken to him. I didn't even try to explain how. No, you've spoken to somebody who claims to be Alfred Furness, Panettiere said. And that's who we're trying to find. That makes two of us, I said. I don't care what you think. You don't know the truth. I was there in the prison. This is what they did to me, the warden and his freaks. My body was covered up, but I knew what it looked like. Too big to be mistaken for human anymore. Puncture wounds all over it from my fight with the warden, and my arms 2 blades that were sharper than scalpels. Alfred Furness was behind it all. He was never there, but he was in charge. He called the shots. It's his army in the city, and they won't stop. He won't stop. Not until the world surrenders itself to him. Fury flared inside me, and this time when I flexed my muscles, the bindings around my chest creaked. But he didn't count on me. He didn't plan on me coming to kill him. I gave up, taking a deep breath to drain away the frustration. And I am going to kill him, I said, softer this time, just as soon as I find him. You know where to look? Asked Panettiere. I shook my head. Okay, it's good to know we're on the same side, she said after a pause. And right now that side is the losing one. Around 1/3 of the home battalion is KIA, dead, and we can't pull in reserves quickly enough. Hell, 60% of our troops are overseas. The emergency services are screwed, and it's spreading faster than we can keep track of. It's already past the county line, west and north. We're lucky we've got the coast to the east, otherwise it would be totally out of our hands. If we don't find a way of stopping this plague, then I give the whole country days, maybe a week, before it's overwhelmed. She returned her attention to the machines, to one in particular, a large empty bell jar connected to me with a thick, transparent plastic tube. We need to find whoever's responsible for this, she said. And at the moment, the person at the top of our hit list is Warden Cross. You know where he is? Dead, I said, remembering his ravaged face, his one eye blinking at me as the wheezers overwhelmed him. I killed him. Panettiere didn't say anything. She just ran a hand over the jar. That gives us one less lead to follow, she said after a moment's pause. Okay, then tell me about the liquid, the black blood that's inside you, inside those creatures. What do you call it? Nectar. That's what Furness calls it, I said, taking it slow, trying to remember what I knew. They never told us what it was, only what it does. It messes with your genes, making you stronger and bigger. It keeps you alive when you've been injured. It can patch up wounds, it can heal broken bones, it can make you immortal too. That's how he's still alive, Furness. The poison in my blood seemed to know I was talking about it, my pulse quickening as it blasted through my system, an animal waiting to be unleashed. It's more than that, though. It alters your mind too. It strips away all the weakness. And most people, when it comes down to it, that's all there is underneath. Weakness. When that's gone, when all the pathetic emotions are gone, all that's left is anger, hatred. That's what those creatures are. They're what's left when you take away everything human. But you're different, Panettiere said. You can talk. You know what's happened to you. How is that? I tried and failed to shrug my shoulders. I refused to forget my name, I said, and there was no other way of explaining it. Neither of us spoke again for what could have been a full minute, and I was the one to break the silence, if only to reassure myself that time hadn't stopped. Let me out of here, I said. I can help you. We both want the same thing. I'll find Alfred Furness and I'll kill him. It's the only chance there is to end this. The Colonel's shoulders seemed to sink, and I heard her sigh. She lifted her hand towards the machine, hesitated for a second, then flicked a switch. I heard a motor start up inside it, the bell jar chattering like joke false teeth. Something tugged in the skin of my arm, the discomfort of a needle buried deep in my flesh. I struggled, but I might as well have been paralysed from the neck down. It was just like in my dream. I'm afraid I can't do that, she said over the din. It's just too dangerous for you to be released right now. We're here to look after you, Alex. That's my priority, to make sure you're okay. That uncomfortable smile appeared on her face again. It showed too many teeth. She patted me on top of the head as if I was a dog. And at the moment, the best place for you is right here in bed. There was a sucking sound, and suddenly the tube leading to the bell jar turned black, piping nectar out of me. It spurted into it, clinging to the sides, steaming, filling it fast. "What are you doing?" I asked, struggling pathetically. "You don't need to worry about it," Panettiere replied, stroking my hair. "We're just taking a sample of the nectar from you. We only want to run a few tests on it to try to find the best way for us to help you, to cure you." "Losing the nectar will kill me," I growled. The woman's smile widened for a moment, and I wondered if it was meant to comfort me. It didn't. It made her look like a shark, those teeth and the glint in her eyes imprinted on my retinas. "It will make you better," she whispered as she walked to the door. "Hush now. Sleep for a while. Get your strength back. Remember, we're here to watch over you. You're safe now, I promise. We won't let anything bad happen to you." Even as the threads of reality began to come loose, the room growing dark as if being buried beneath a mountain of sand, I could sense how difficult those last words were for her. She was lying. Drained. "I died in that orchard." Furness's voice rang in my ears as the nectar drained from my arteries. All I could do was watch as the black fluid cascaded into that jar, my racing pulse emptying my body of the life force that fueled it. The edges of the room began to crowd with shadows. My head thrashed back and forth as I tried to stay awake. I knew that if I let the darkness take me now, then I'd never see the light again. But the more nectar that spilled from me, the more the world began to fade. I tried to talk, to plead, but Panettiere had already gone. "I died, but it wasn't the end," he continued, his words seeming to push the last of the light away. The room flickered, the nightmare orchard flashing over reality for a fraction of a second, leaving skeletal trees imprinted like veins over my retinas. I blinked, and the scene reappeared. Every leaf, every decomposing apple, every feather on every bird picked out in perfect detail, so much so that it seemed more real than the room that I was in. I could even feel the breeze on my face, a cold zephyr like a dead man's breath, and it was this sensation that finally made me surrender. I blinked again, and I was back in the hospital. I turned, saw the jar almost full. Then I closed my eyes. Furness's words ringing through me as though my whole body was now hollow, his whisper carrying me into unconsciousness. "Death is never the end." It was as if I'd woken from a deep sleep. The cell, the bed, the woman called Panettiere, nothing but a blurred memory that faded away after a couple of blinks. Only I knew that this was the dream world, the nightmare. The orchard around me was impossibly clear, focusing a little more every time I visited. There was sound now too, the creak and crack of distant branches, the rustle of the leaves in the breeze, and the coarse caws of the crows as they abandoned their feast of apples and crowded greedily around the boy on the tree. No time had passed since I'd last been here. Heavy night suffocated the moonlit orchard as before. Furness's eyes were open, but only just, looking at me as if I'd never gone away. The flow of blood had all but stopped, leaving his skin as pale as bone. His chest fluttered, as weak as a newborn bird, fighting for every breath. I didn't expect to be able to move, but when I tried to turn my head, I found that I was no longer completely paralysed. My legs were still rooted to the ground, my torso as stiff as wood, but my hands were now free, and when I lifted them in front of my face, I saw that the nectar-grown blades had gone. My hands looked like they had before I'd gone to prison, the normal hands of a normal kid. I stretched my arms out towards Alfred Furness, but he was too far away to reach. His eyes swam in and out of focus as he fought to see me. "Where are we?" I asked, my voice startling the birds, causing some to take flight into the safety of the branches. The braver ones ignored me, looking around briefly before dipping their beaks back into the blood-soaked soil. But when I clapped my hands, the noise like a gunshot, even those scattered in a flurry of raucous cawing. "This is a dream, right?" I said, as much to myself as to Furness. The boy shook his head, the effort seeming to drain him of the last of his energy. His lips opened, words tumbling out in that strange guttural language that I could somehow understand. "To you, it is a dream," he said. "To me, it is a memory." Even here I could feel my body grow weak, and I remembered that back in the world, the real world, I was being drained of the nectar that kept me alive. But almost as soon as I sensed it, the dream numbed my panic. The real world didn't matter here. There was only the orchard and Alfred Furness. "A memory," I said. "You mean this actually happened? When?" "A long, long time ago." The boy spat out a bullet of crimson phlegm, his entire body spasming. "They thought I killed my brother, but I didn't. He did it. The stranger who lives in this orchard." "The stranger?" I looked around nervously. "Who do you mean? Is he still here?" "Quiet," hissed Furness. "He'll hear you, and you don't want that. This may only be a dream for you, but he still has power here." "So the orchard is real?" I tried again. "It was once real. This is a bad place. It always has been. Battles were fought here many centuries ago, countless lives taken, countless souls crushed. The soil here is tainted, the fruit of these trees nourished on blood. That is why he is here." He paused, his eyes swivelling as his thoughts took him somewhere else. "We were told never to come to the orchard, that it was cursed. But we dared each other. We came, and my brother paid the price. Now it is my turn. They have left me here for the wolves, but the stranger will get me first. I do not have long." "Tell me what I can do," I said. "I can help." "It is too late," Furness replied. "The boy I once was died a long, long time ago. These events have already happened. They cannot be changed, but it is important that you see for yourself." "It is not too late." Furness shot me a look of white-eyed terror, and the rest of the sentence dried up in my throat. "Hush," he hissed. "He is here." The temperature in the orchard dipped, as though the forest had been submerged in ice water. Even in the dream, the cold clawed into my bones, making me feel like I'd never in my life experienced warmth. The air grew thin, stripped of oxygen, yet at the same time the darkness seemed to gain weight, an invisible fist grinding me into the dirt. As I gasped for air, I felt something swell inside my chest, a feeling a million times worse than death, so awful that I would have chosen to leave the world right here and now, forever, rather than suffer it any longer. It was terror, I realised. The kind reserved for nightmares, when your mind has no defence against the dark. It was the most primitive, most powerful emotion of all, and I have never, ever felt it like this. This wasn't just a fear of losing my life, but a fear of losing my soul. I scanned the orchard, frantically searching for the source of my panic. The gnarled trunks of the apple trees circled us like the bars of a cage. Between them were pockets of night, so utterly black that it was as if nothing existed beyond, as though to step out of this clearing would be to step right out of life itself, into the abyss. My eyes fell on the void that separated the two trees closest to where Furness had been crucified. There was nothing there, at least nothing that I could see. And yet I knew that something stood in that spot, shrouded in shadow, watching us. I could feel it, radiating coldness and darkness like an inverse sun, dead eyes scouring the orchard. My heart lurched, my mind screaming, every fibre of my body railing against the thing in the woods. "It's a dream," my mind howled, but there was no fooling myself. It was real, completely and utterly real. Nothing in my entire life had been more certain. Whatever stood there was real, and it was evil. More than that, I realised that this thing was trapped here amongst the blood and the filth of this orchard. Don't ask me how I knew that. I just did. Some truths are instinctive, absolute. They have to be, because your survival depends upon getting as far away from them as possible. I ordered myself to wake up. I just needed to be away from this thing, this unspeakable terror that made the end of life seem so welcome. I yelled at myself, trying to pump adrenaline into my system, trying to shunt myself out of the nightmare. It was working. The tops of the trees were splintering, dissolving into fragments that soared up into the night. The orchard began to flex and bulge, breaking apart, pieces of Dreamworld scattering like scraps of burning paper. "Don't leave me," the boy said, Alfred Furness. "Please don't leave me with him." But nothing on earth could keep me there, not with that soulless entity between the trees, watching us with eyes as black as pitch, a force so malevolent that it made Warden Cross and Alfred Furness both look like angels. I put the boy's pleas out of my head, pushed up from the dream like a diver breaking from deep water, desperate to reach the surface. I had almost made it when the stranger stepped from between the trees, bringing the darkness with him, a silhouette of flickering shadow who reached out for Furness with one impossibly long arm, and for me with the other, who fixed me with an invisible grin as I rose from the dream, who watched me go with an expression of wicked delight, and whose silent, deafening laughter followed me all the way back to the waking world. Okay, should we go one more? Go on then. Tests. I opened my eyes with the echo of that insane howling still reverberating around my shattered thoughts. I blinked away the last few scraps of sleep to see that I was inside a large, noisy room. The walls and floor covered in pristine white tiles, so bright that it could have been built that day. It looked like a hospital operating room, only much bigger. I was still lying down, wires and sensors strapped to almost every inch of me, countless needles taped beneath my skin. Tight coils of shipping wire pinned my legs and my chest to some sort of metal table. Even before I attempted to struggle free, I knew I wouldn't be able to. My arms were exposed, held in vice-like clamps on either side of the table. I looked at my right hand, the blade of the nectar-blackened limb longer and sharper than ever. I glanced at my left, seeing that the nectar was still at work there. The stump of my left arm had split into 3 stub-like protrusions. They weren't fingers, not recognisably anyway. They looked more like the shoots of a plant, jutting from the charred flesh. Each was no longer than a big toe, but when I wiggled them, they all moved. It didn't make any sense. Had the nectar been trying to grow me a new hand? Could it do that? Why hadn't it happened with my right arm? There were too many questions, and none of them had answers. The transformation must have started when I was unconscious, before they drained the nectar from me. Maybe the nectar behaved differently when you were asleep, when you weren't in the middle of a fight for your life. I tried to get a better look, but it was hopeless. I felt like the boy from my dream, Alfred Furness, trussed up and left to bleed out. It was as though my body had been drained almost to the point of death, and I was now running on fumes. The blackened, nectar-filled veins beneath my skin were nowhere to be seen, and my flesh had paled to a sickly grey colour. There was only a trickle of blood left inside me, just enough to keep my heart pumping. Every beat of my pulse felt like it might be my last. I turned my head, trying to make sense of the room that I was in. All around me was chaos. Rows of tables like the one I was on extended in every direction. There must have been 100 or more. Half were occupied, mostly by rats dressed in the tattered remains of their prison overalls. There was nothing left in them of the children they had once been, before they'd been contaminated with Furness's new nectar. They thrashed against their restraints, their black-shot eyes full of hatred, hunger, so hungry for blood that their teeth gnawed at their own lips and tongues, pooled of poison spilling between them. I heard a guttural bark and swung my head around to look at the far side of the room. Chained to the wall was a berserker. It stood head and shoulders over the soldiers around it, its rage radiating from it in waves of heat, but its face that of a child. Like me, like all of us, it was bound tight, mummified in a cocoon of shipping wire. The only thing it had to defend itself with was its voice. On the table next to me was another figure, a black suit, although he was no longer wearing the uniform of his master. Scalpel handles rose up from his bare chest, dozens of them, like a miniature graveyard. He looked as though he was out cold, maybe dead, his unblinking silver eyes staring at the skylights above him, through which sunlight dripped like honey. I turned my attention away from the freaks to the other people in the room, the ones who weren't tied up. There must have been 30 of them. A few were dressed in black combat suits and armed with machine guns, but most were wearing long white coats or surgeon's gowns. And it was these men and women, not the monsters, who filled me with fear, who made me want to rip away my restraints and run, because they all had gas masks on. A few of the scientists were monitoring the machines whose blinking displays painted the walls with light. Others walked among the forklift trucks lined up against one side of the room, or supervised transparent vats of bubbling black fluid, burning red stars sparkling in their depths. Tubes stretched out from these vats, connected to several of the rats, pumping them dry, leaving nothing but husks. Most of the gas-masked scientists, though, moved between the tables, surgical equipment gripped in their gloved hands, their eyes bright behind misted visors. I sensed movement above me, and I realised that the room had an observation balcony, a narrow glass-walled walkway that ran around all 4 sides. There were more people up there watching, wearing a mix of suits and military uniforms, not camouflage but dress gear that bristled with medals and insignias. The phrase "top brass" popped into my head from nowhere, although I didn't really know what it meant. I managed to open my mouth and call to them. "Hey!" Less a word than a grunt, but it obviously did the trick because an intercom crackled, a faint voice hissing out of it. 14 is awake, it said. There was a pause, indistinct voices, then, "Begin the procedure." I felt like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The only parts of my body that still seemed to function were my eyes, which turned in their sockets as the mob in the room approached. I could hear their wheezing breaths, heavy with excitement, and their movements were staggered and anxious. A sense of déjà vu sat like a boulder of ice in my stomach. The closest one reached me, and through the mask I realised it wasn't a Ouiser, but Colonel Panettiere. She reached out with a white-gloved hand and rested it on my chest. "Don't panic," she said, her voice muffled. "The masks are for your protection, not ours. We've drained you of about 90% of your blood supply, and we're worried that without the nectar you'll have no immunity against infection. This room is part of a hospital. It's where we're going to try to make you better." I knew exactly what kind of room this was. The infirmary back in the prison had been a hospital too. "Z," Panettiere said, giving a thumbs up to the balcony overhead. "You want to have a word?" The intercom flicked on again, nothing but static for a second. Then I heard a voice. "Alex," it said, "just do what they say. Don't fight them. I think they're trying to help. Don't fight them or they'll kill." There was a clatter, a squeal, then the intercom cut off. I tried to look up, peering through blurred vision to see a shape behind the glass above me, a boy among the soldiers. I blinked, my eyelids so heavy they almost wouldn't open again, and for a second I saw a kid that I recognised, the kid Panettiere had called Z. There were memories connected with him, too deep for me to make any sense of, but they existed. I'm sure of it. He banged on the soundproof glass, screaming silently at me, and by the time my head had dropped again, he was already being hauled away. He knows what's best for you, Alex. What's best for you and your friend Simon. I scanned the room, looking for the face that matched Simon's name, but I could barely remember what he looked like. Panettiere removed her hand from my chest, holding it out to somebody beside her. One of the other gas masks passed her something, metal glinting in the sunlight. In the silence that followed, I almost fell back into sleep. Dark trees seeming to sprout from the bodies in front of me, spreading like a web of cancerous arteries across the ceiling. I had a flash of the young Alfred Furness, and of the dark figure who was still mid-step from his pocket of shadow, and that pumped enough adrenaline into my heart to shove the dream away. Better here than there, better anywhere than in that orchard. "This will be painful, Alex," Panettiere said, "and for that I apologise. But a cure can often be more painful than the disease. That's simply the way of things." The scientists moved in, staring at me like I was the main course at a banquet. I felt like it too, like a spit-roasted pig, trussed up and ready to be carved. I wanted to howl at them, to lash out, to show them I wasn't some carnival freak show, but the simple act of moving seemed as impossible as leaping over an ocean. "Are you ready?" Panettiere asked, placing the object in her hand against my shoulder. It was a scalpel. I shook my head, opened my mouth to protest, but before I could answer, she pushed the surgical knife deep into my flesh. It didn't hurt. No more than a mosquito bite, anyway. I'd experienced far greater pain, far more severe injuries, but at least most of the time I'd been able to fight back. Tied up here, unable to defend myself, felt infinitely worse. It was just like being back in the tunnels beneath Furnace. Keep your eye on his heart rate, Panettiere said to one of the other scientists as she drew the blade in a tight semicircle over my shoulder. I could just about twist my head round far enough to see the wound, wide open but bloodless. The woman smiled down at me, although through the visor it looked more like a leer, her lips pulled back too far. "You're doing great, Alex. It won't be much longer." She turned to the group of scientists who were all eagerly monitoring the machines beside me. "Any change?" Somebody muttered something back to her and she nodded, obviously pleased. She pushed the knife deeper, so deep that I felt it grind against my shoulder joint. I winced, more at the thought than at the pain. She placed her other hand on my chest, making shushing noises. "Shh. Does it hurt?" she asked. "Yes," I spat back. "Couldn't you have done this while I was asleep?" "We need to gauge your reaction," she said. "Physiological and psychological. Besides, I don't think it does hurt that much. Be brave. It's going to be fine." She pulled the scalpel free, handing it to somebody else. The scientists clustered around me, all staring at the wound, their piggy eyes greedy and unblinking. They weren't looking at a boy, at a human. All I was to them was a science experiment, a specimen. Across the room, something screamed, the noise of a rabbit caught in a snare. I tilted my head back as far as it would go, everything upside down, and saw another group of scientists surrounding a rat 6 or 7 tables away. The creature writhed wildly, nectar spilling from between its lips. It was no longer human. It wasn't even an animal anymore. It had no desire to eat or to sleep. It would live a short life of violence before the nectar deserted it, and then it would simply stop existing. If anything, the rat was like a virus, living only to spread to another host. And yet, it still wore those overalls, torn and bloodied but recognisable. Just days ago, this rat had been a prisoner inside Furnace Penitentiary, a kid like me wanting nothing more than to survive, to find a way out. Be careful what you wish for, I thought. The scientists around the rat turned and nodded at each other, then called for a soldier. One of the camouflaged figures strolled over, spoke briefly with one of them, then without hesitating placed his pistol against the rat's temple and pulled the trigger. There was an eruption of dark liquid, mist spraying against their visors, the creature's movements growing less frenzied, settling into sporadic twitches. "Don't worry about that," said Panettiere, forcing my head forward until the image was out of sight. "Some things are broken past the point of fixing." She muttered an order, and somebody passed her an instrument. It caught the light, leaving a fragment of sunshine in my eye, and for a moment I thought it was another blade. "Right, I'm giving him 2 milliliters directly into the wound. Pay attention to BP and AT counts. Everything set?" Not a blade, then. A syringe. There were murmurs of assent, and Panettiere slid the needle into my skin. As soon as the liquid entered my body, I knew what it was. Nectar. Not much, a thimbleful, but enough to turn my thoughts to thunder. I watched that trickle of red-flecked poison vanish into the hole Panettiere had carved into my shoulder, a single black bubble bursting from my flesh. And then it hit me. My thoughts turned to fire. Every cell of my body reawakened. I roared, the noise rocking the room, sending the scientists flying back like bowling pins. Only Panettiere stood her ground, her eyes burning as if they were reflecting the flames inside me. "Keep watching those readings," she barked. "I don't want to miss anything." My roar subsided into a growl, a throbbing purr that settled in my throat. I tugged at my hand, knowing how easily I could slice through the women in front of me, through all of them, with my bladed fingers, and I would have too, if I'd been free. I'd have killed them all where they stood. There, Panettiere said to me. Shh, hush, hush. Be brave. There's no reason to get upset. This will all be over very soon. Then, to somebody else, oh my God, it's working, look! I pushed against her fingers, seeing the scalpel wound already clotting with hardening nectar. I didn't see what the big deal was. I'd recovered from far worse injuries than that, but the scientists were obviously impressed as they were practically fighting each other to get a closer look. Fairhurst, get a sample of that, Panettiere said, prodding the scab with her gloved finger. I tried another growl, but what little nectar had been pumped into my system was already used up. Somebody shoved his way to the front, using another scalpel to slice off a section of the clotted wound before scampering off with his prize. You seeing that? Panettiere went on. Readings are off the chart. His temperature's going on for 58 degrees centigrade. They busied themselves around me for what seemed like forever, measuring, gauging, prodding. All I could do was lie there, hoping that they were telling me the truth, that they were looking for a cure. I don't know how much later it was that Panettiere lifted the scalpel again, holding it a few centimetres away from the first hole she'd made. Just a few more of these, she said. We need to do this because we have to understand how you work. We have to unlock the truth of your genetic mutations. You must realise that if we can't, if we fail, then the country will fall. I protested, but even as the words tumbled from my mouth, her blade was slicing into my skin, parting it as if it was paper. Don't be a baby, Alex, she said. I know you're braver than this. Just grit your teeth and it will be over in a minute. But it wasn't. I don't know how long it went on, my consciousness flowing in and out like the tide on a moonless night. It could have been hours. It felt like days. The scientists came and went, anonymous behind their masks. Only Panettiere stayed, cutting hole after hole, then fixing them up with a droplet of nectar. Each time she'd whisper comforting words into my ear, stroking my brow, but her eyes never met mine. They never left the canvas of ravaged skin laid out in front of her. At some point I lost the strength to keep my head up, and it fell to the side. Past the churning ocean of gas masks, I made out the black suit on the table beside me. He hadn't been dead after all, because he stared back, his eyes more lead than silver, a trail of black blood leaking from his lips down over his cheek. I didn't look away, and neither did he. We just lay there, watching each other. We were enemies, yes, but right now we were bound by the same horror, the same powerlessness, the same fear. We all were. Everything in this room. The black suits, the rats, the berserkers, and me. We were enemies, but I'd never felt closer to them. We were enemies, but we were brothers, with a common goal. We had to get out of here. Okay, cool. And the next chapter is called Into the Pit. I think the one after that is called The Stranger. If my memory serves, it is. And we learn a little bit more about who this presence in the orchard is. Okay, cool. I'm really enjoying this. I hope you are too. Come back tomorrow and yeah, we will read the next 2 or 3 chapters of Escape from Furnace 5, Execution. Bye.